The Spring Tune. One calm and cloudless evening, towards the end of April, Snufkin found himself far enough to the north to see still unmelted patches of snow on the northern slopes. He'd been walking all day through undisturbed landscapes, listening to the cries of the birds, also on their way northwards, home from the south. Walking had been easy because his knapsack was nearly empty, and he had no worries on his mind. He felt happy about the wood and the weather and himself. Tomorrow and yesterday were both at a distance, and just at present the sun was shining brightly red between the birches, and the air was cool and soft. It's the right evening for a tune, Snufkin thought. A new tune, 1 part expectation, 2 parts spring sadness. Of the rest, just the great delight of walking alone and liking it. He'd kept this tune under his hat for several days, but hadn't quite dared to take it out yet. He had to grow into a kind of happy conviction. Then he would simply have to put his lips on his mouthhole, and all the notes would jump instantly into their places. If he released them too soon, they might get stuck crossways and make only a half-good tune, or he might lose them altogether and never be in the right mood to get hold of them again. Tunes are serious things, especially if they have to be jolly and sad at the same time. But this evening Snufkin felt rather sure of his tune. It was there waiting, nearly fully grown, and it was going to be the best he'd ever made. Then when he arrived in Moomin Valley, he'd sit on the bridge rail and play it, and Moomin Troll would say at once, "That's a good tune, a really good one." Snufkin stopped in his tracks, feeling just a little bit uneasy. Yes, Moomin Troll, always waiting and longing. Moomin Troll who sat at home, who waited for him and admired him, and who always told him, "Of course you have to feel free. Naturally you must go away. I do understand. You have to be alone at times." And all the time, his eyes were black with disappointment. No one could help it. Oh my, Snufkin said to himself and continued on his way. Oh my. He's got such a lot of feelings, this Moomin Troll. I won't think of him now. He's a splendid Moomin, but I don't have to think of him now. Tonight I'm alone with my tune, and tonight isn't tomorrow. In a little while Snufkin had managed to forget all about Moomin Troll. He was sniffing around for a good place to camp. And when he heard a brook a bit further on in the wood, he went towards the sound. The last red ray of sunlight had vanished between the birches. Now came the spring twilight, slow and blue. All the wood was changed, and the white pillars of the birches went wandering further and further off in the blue dusk. The brook was a good one. It went rushing clear and brown over woods of last year's leaves, through small tunnels of leftover ice, swerving through the green moss and throwing itself headlong in a small waterfall on the white sand bottom. In places it droned sharp as a mosquito, then it tried to sound great and menacing, stopped and gurgled with a mouthful of melted snow and laughed at it all. Snufkin stood listening in the damp moss. I must have the brook in my tune also, he thought. In the refrain, I think. A small stone suddenly came loose near the waterfall and raised the pitch of the brook a whole octave. Not bad, Snufkin said admiringly. That's the way to do it. A sudden change just in passing. I'll have to find that brook a tune of its own. He took out his old saucepan and filled it with a waterfall. Then he went in under the firs to look for firewood. The ground was still wet from the spring thaw and the rains, and Snufkin had to crawl far under a brambly windfall to find any dry sticks. When he reached out, someone gave a sudden shout and flashed past him, off amongst the firs, still crying and squeaking all the way. Oh yes, Snufkin said, creeps and woodies everywhere. Funny how nervous they always seem to be, the smaller and jumpier. He found a dry stump and some sticks and built himself a good campfire by the brook. Snufkin was used to cooking his own dinner. He never cooked a dinner for other people if he could avoid it, nor did he care much for other people's dinners. So many people insisted on talking when they had a meal. Also, they had a great liking for chairs and tables, and some of them used napkins. He'd even heard of a Hemulin who changed his clothes every time he was about to eat, but that was probably slander. A little distractedly, Snufkin ate the meagre soup while he rested his eyes on the green moss by the birches. The tune was quite near at hand, easy to catch by the tail, but there was time enough to wait. It was hedged in and couldn't get away. No better to wash the dishes first, then light a pipe, and afterwards, when the campfire was burning down and the night creatures started to call in for each other, then he'd have it. Snufkin was washing this saucepan in the brook when he caught sight of the creep, who was sitting on the far side below a tree root, looking at him. Its eyes were scared, but very interested, following Snufkin's every movement. Two eyes shut under a mop of hair. Just the look people have who are never noticed. Snufkin pretended that he hadn't seen the creep. He raked up his fire and cut himself some fir twigs to sit on. He took out his pipe and lit it. He puffed a few clouds of smoke towards the night sky and waited for the spring tune. It didn't come. Instead, he felt the creep's eyes upon him. They watched everything he did admiringly, and he began to feel uneasy once more. He clapped his paws together and shouted, "Shoo, be off!" At this, the creep slunk out from under the tree root. He was still on the other side of the brook and said, very shyly, "I hope I haven't scared you. I know who you are. You're Snufkin." And the creep stepped straight into the water and started to wade across. The brook was rather too broad for it, and the water was ice cold. A couple of times the creep lost its foothold and tumbled over. But Snufkin was feeling so uneasy that he simply didn't think of giving it a hand. Finally, a rather thin and miserable creep crawled ashore and said with chattering teeth, "Hello, happy to meet you." "Hello," Snufkin answered, equally coldly. "May I warm myself up by your fire?" the creep continued, its wet face shining with happiness. "Just think of it! That'll be the creep who sat by Snufkin's campfire. I'll never forget that." The creep edged closer, laid one paw on Snufkin's napkin, and solemnly whispered, "Is this where you keep the mouth organ? Do you have it here?" "Yes," Snufkin said rather crossly. His tune was lost. Loneliness was gone. All was different. He clenched his teeth around the pipe stem, stirred amongst the birches without really seeing them. Now don't mind me," Creep said innocently. In case you'd like to play, I mean. You'd never guess how long for a little music. I've never heard any. But I've heard about you, the hedgehog and the Toffle, and my mother. They've all told me. Toffle has even seen you once. Yes, you can't imagine nothing much ever happens here, but we dream lots and lots." "Well, what's your name?" Snufkin asked. The evening spoiled her anyway. He thought it's easier to talk. "I'm so small I haven't got a name," Creep said. "As a matter of fact, nobody's ever asked me about it before, and then I meet you, whom I've heard so much about and always longed to see, and the first thing you ask me is what's my name. Do you think perhaps you might, would it be a lot of trouble for you to think up a name for me? A name that would be only my name, and no one else could have it. Now, tonight." Snufkin mumbled something, pulled his hat over his eyes. Someone flew across the brook on long pointed wings and gave a sad cry amongst the trees. You too." "You can't ever be really free if you admire somebody too much," Snufkin suddenly said. "I know." "I know you know everything," the little creep prattled on, edging closer still. "I know you've seen everything. You're right in everything you say, and always try to become as free as you are. So now you're on your way to Moomin Valley to have a rest and meet your friends. Hedgehog told me that Moomin Troll started waiting for you as soon as he wakes from winter sleep. Isn't it a nice thing to know that somebody's longing for you and waiting to see you again? I'm coming when it suits me, Snufkin cried violently. Perhaps I shan't come at all. Perhaps I'll go somewhere else. Oh, then you'll be sad, said the creep. Its fur was beginning to dry and becoming light brown and soft. It picked up the knapsack once again and asked cautiously, would you perhaps, you've travelled so much? No, Snufkin said. He thought angrily. Why can't they ever let my wanderings alone? Can't they understand that I'll talk it all to pieces if I have to tell all about it? Then it's gone. When I try to remember what it really was like, I remember only my own story. There was a long silence. The bird cried again. The creep rose and said in a small voice, I must be off, I think. Cheerio. Cheerio, Snufkin said, fidgeting a little. The name you asked for. What about Titi-Woo, for instance? Titi-Woo, don't you see the light beginning, sort of, and the little sadness to round it off? Little creep stared at him, with yellow eyes in the firelight. Thought its name over, tasted it, listened to it, crawled inside it, finally turned its snout to the sky and softly howled its new name, so sadly and ecstatically that Snufkin felt a shiver along his back. And the brown tail disappeared to the brambles, and all was silent. Golly, Snufkin said, and kicked at the ember. He rapped out his pipe, then he rose and shouted, Hello, come back! But the wood was silent. Oh well, Snufkin thought. You can't always be friendly. It's impossible. There isn't the time. And at least this creep has got a name. He sat down again and listened to the brook and the silence and waited for his tune to come back. But it didn't come back. He knew at once that it had moved too far away to be caught. Perhaps he'd never catch it. The only thing he seemed to hear was the eager and shy voice of the creep, talking and talking and talking. Oh, why don't they keep at home with their mother, Snufkin said crossly, and threw himself on his back on the fir twigs. After a while he sat up and shouted once more. He listened for a long time, then he pulled his hat over his snout and went to sleep. The next morning Snufkin continued his march. He was tired and cross and trudged northwards without looking right or left. Not even the faintest beginning of a tune moved under his hat. He simply couldn't think of anything but the creep. He remembered every single word it had said and every word he had said himself, and he chewed them over and over until he felt sick and had to sit down and rest. Oh, what's come over me, Snufkin thought, angry, bewildered. I never felt like this before. I must be ill. He rose and continued his way. He started all over again, everything the creep had told him and all he had said in reply. Finally he had to stop. In the afternoon he turned about, started back. After a while he felt better. He went faster and faster. He bubbled as he ran. Little tunes flitted about his ears, but he hadn't the time to catch them. Towards evening he was back in the birchwood and started to call. Titi-Woo, he cried, Titi-Woo. The night birds awoke and answered him, Too, too, but he heard nothing from the creep. Snufkin walked back and forth, looking and calling and listening until dusk had fallen. The new moon rose in a clearing, and Snufkin stood looking at it and feeling quite at a loss. I ought to make a wish, he thought. It's a new moon. He was about to wish the usual thing, a new tune, or, as he sometimes did, a new road. But now he hastily corrected himself and said aloud, to find Titi-Woo. Then he turned round 3 times, crossed the clearing, pointed into the wood, and up a hill. Something rustled in the bushes, something light and brown and furry. Tee-tee-woo, Snufkin called softly. I've come back for a chat. Oh, look, hello, Tee-tee-woo replied, stuck out his head from the bushes. That's splendid, because I've got something to show you. Look, a nameplate with my name on it, to hang on my door when I get home of my own. Creep showed a piece of bark with an owner's mark on it. Continued importantly, neat, isn't it? Everybody thinks so. Very, said Snufkin. So you'll have a house of your own. Indeed, Creep said excitedly. I've moved away from home and begun living. It's so exciting. You see, before I had a name, I just used to hop around and perhaps feel this or that about this or that, and everything was simply happening around me. Something nice, some nice things, and some not so nice, but nothing was real. Don't you see? Snufkin started to reply, but the Creep continued. Now I'm a person, and everything that happens means something, because it doesn't only happen, it happens to me. Tee-tee-woo. Tee-tee-woo may think this or think that about it, as the case may be. But you see what I mean? Certainly I see, said Snufkin. That's good for you. Tee-tee-woo nodded, started to rummage in the bushes. You know what, said Snufkin, I'm on my way to Moomin still. As a matter of fact, I really want to see him. Oh, said Tee-tee-woo. Moomin Troll, yes. Perhaps you'd like to hear some tunes before I start, Snufkin continued. Maybe a few stories. Creep stuck out his head and said, Stories? Oh yes. Later tonight, perhaps. Just at the moment. I mean, quite a hurry. I'm sure you don't mind. The light brown tail vanished in the heather. After a while, Tee-tee-woo's ears came into view, a little bit further away, and then he called out, Cheerio! Give my greetings to Moomin Troll. I have to live as fast as I can, because I've lost a lot of time already. Then he was gone. Snufkin scratched his head. So he said to himself, Yes, I see. He stretched out on his back, looked up into the spring sky. It was a clear, dark blue straight above him, with sea green over the treetops. Somewhere under his hat, the tune began to move. 1 part expectation, 2 parts spring sadness, and for the rest, just a colossal delight being alone.
So what I think is that Tove Jansson, because this is a very different book, this is a collection of tales from Moomin Valley. She isn't sort of sustaining it, sort of following one character through it. This first one, Snufkin, is having an encounter, I think it's Tove Jansson really, between her needing to be free and her creation of this creature, Moomin, that she's got to keep revisiting and illustrating on other people's behalf. She started off creating this creature to create freedom for herself, and then find sort of limitation by doing the one thing all the time. So she did eventually have a lot of other adventures beyond Moomin Valley, by travelling the world for herself, and away from the island where she'd sort of been with her sort of family, creating these things as a little girl. So I think the whole thing, Snufkin is basically Tove Jansson. I don't know whether she played a musical instrument, but she's clearly an artist who wanted to do fresh and see fresh things. So there we go. That's Jim's theory about Tove Jansson's little first story in this different type of a book. These tales from Moomin Valley, which don't follow a single character, but keep on having little adventures, playlets of her creatures.